What did Paul mean when he said, I do not permit a woman to teach in 1 Timothy chapter 2? Let's talk about it. This is a conversation between Don Carson, Tim Keller, people who are very beloved by, especially like people in Calvinist circles, and they're going to discuss the verse. I haven't seen this yet, but I will watch what they say, give my reaction, perspective on it, and all that.
What is Paul forbidding there, do you think?
Well, let me make an advertisement, first of all.
Okay.
There's a recent commentary by Bob Yarbrough, on the PNTC series on the pastoral epistles that is especially strong in following the trace of the argument through the text. And it's one of the best treatments of 1 Timothy 2 I've seen anywhere, simply because it follows the trace.
What series is that in? It's in
the Pillar series.
Okay, that's right.
Yeah. So, by all means, if you want more exegetical detail, that's where I'd look first. And then the next thing I'd say, you can configure that as two limitations or one. I do not permit a woman to teach or have authority. Is that two things? Or is it one thing?
Yeah.
And syntactically, that is, according to the way the Greek sentence is put together, it's two things. But it's pretty close to one thing anyway.
Yeah.
That is, the authority that was exercised in the early church was primarily through the Word. It was not from some hierarchical structure or status.
So are we talking about two things or one thing? Because it says, I do not permit a woman to teach or have authority over a man, but to remain silent. So is he giving two prohibitions, or is it the same prohibition just with two details in it? As he said, the authority was found in the preaching of the Word. It was still being revealed in the first century. You can say one, you can say two. You really are saying the same thing. You've got to include both of them, though. You can't just say it's only authority and I can separate teaching from authority. In this context, teaching is authoritative.
So it sounds like a church-recognized word-based authority, what has come to be called a magisterial authority, a teaching authority, which seems to be the limitation that Paul has in mind, and that is in line with other texts that one finds in the New Testament. To my mind, that's the focus of that.
Interesting. By the way, first of all, I just to show where we are in our cultural moment, I bought the Pillar commentary by Bob, and I immediately opened it and read that section, and I did think it was masterful, and I said, here we go, this is great. And I like the fact that, here I'm speaking as a pastor practitioner, I like the fact that you say there is some debate about whether that's two things or one, and there are people, I've seen some people who, I'm convinced by what you said that it's one thing, but there are people who say it's two, and what I do at Redeemer, what I've done over the years, and it's not a popular position, is to say, Paul is forbidding something here. Something. And I'm open to anybody who may have a different opinion from me on what that is or how that works itself out. We also have to keep in mind that different denominations invest different levels of authority in different offices. And therefore, what authority looks like in a Baptist church or a Presbyterian church or an Anglican church might be different. And so I'm open to that. I am not open to somebody saying there isn't anything he's forbidding, or that was not a transcultural statement, and therefore we don't have to, it doesn't bind us anymore. So
that's a good first step that he's trying to establish here. He's saying we should be able to agree that something is being forbidden. Clearly, something is being forbidden. I mean, that's literally what he is doing. I do not permit this. So we should be able to agree on that. That's the easiest first step. When we have disagreement on this issue, can we at least agree that something is being forbidden? If you can't, then we're having a different conversation. Now we're having a conversation about how Paul the Apostle is saying this is forbidden, and you're saying nothing is being forbidden at all in this passage. You have no answer for what is being forbidden. So we should be able to agree at least that something is being forbidden, and then talk about what that is.
Or it's just so difficult, therefore we can't know, therefore.
Well, that's interesting. An awful lot of young Christians are doing that. They're throwing their hands up and they're saying, since I can't understand it, I'm just going to do what seems right to me.
Yeah, people do that with a lot of the Bible. They go, a difficult passage, and I'm kind of scared to know what the answer is. Let's be agnostic. We don't know what it's talking about. We'll never know what it's talking about. Way too vague. We don't have enough information on it, or something like that. A lot of the time people are scared, it seems, of arriving at what the Bible says, so they just go, we can't know this. Agnostic about it.
Yeah. So, yeah.
It's what a friend of mine likes to call imperial ignorance. That is to say, it's the assertion that not only I don't know, but you cannot know.
Right. That's a good point. And it's self-justifying, too. It's really saying,
Called it agnostic.
This open the door to anything.
to anything I want to do. So I would generally say he's forbidding something. You show me something, and I'll work with you on that. But don't tell me he's not forbidding anything, because he is. But how would you answer that question? How do you know this is a transcultural piece of an exhortation that's true for all time and all churches?
As opposed
Transcultural exhortation means basically, because some people say this passage only has to do with that specific culture, has no application to today. He's saying, how do you know? What's your argument that this goes beyond that culture and it extends to today, and it's not just only stuck in 1 Timothy chapter 2 and the immediate culture in Ephesus?
to greet one another with a holy kiss.
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Real quick, also, in case you don't know, Romans 16, greet one another with a holy kiss. That is a cultural thing. I would argue the same thing. And so how do you delineate between what is a cultural thing and what is not?
Two things. Paul grounds his argument first in the order of creation and second in the order of the fall. Now, you can wrestle quite a long time with exactly what that means. I'm prepared to venture a suggestion, but the point is, it's hard to think of any events in all of the Bible that are less culturally dependent than the order of creation.
Certainly.
It's not as if Paul is saying, now considering the relative ignorance of women who don't have enough education, therefore I forbid such and such. That's not what he's saying.
No, he's not.
It's tied in his own argumentation to two things that are massively transcultural.
Yeah, it almost seems like he may know somebody might question. At least, certainly, it is an inconvenient that he does that for people who.
So, real quick, why is it transcultural? Because he is ordering it, or he is basing it, rooting it in the creation and the fall. He is tying it to one of the most major events in human history as far as people and God, and just all people in general, which is creation and the fall. So this is more than just a practice that is existing that Paul is preserving for a time. This is something that is rooted in the way we were made and in the fall after we were made.
Somebody might question. At least, certainly, it is an inconvenient that he does that for people who really don't like the exhortation. The only thing I say, again, as a practitioner, is if somebody says, how do you know it's a transcultural passage? I say, well, how do you know it's not? Especially when you're talking about a New Testament passage, it seems to me that the burden of proof is on the person who says it's not, and it should be a very high bar.
Yes. The people who say this is cultural, how do you even establish that? How do you even establish that it is just simply cultural, given that context that they just talked about with creation and the fall? People, that's why they just try to go agnostic about it and say, I'm just gonna kind of ignore that verse because no one knows what it can mean. So I'll just proceed as if 1 Timothy 2 doesn't exist, and then therefore God's going to be okay with that. We can know what it means. It's explained. And so if you're going to say that it's cultural, as he says, and I agree with that completely, that's a very high bar if you're going to be able to prove that case.
And in light of the way he ties it to the creation and the fall, it's very difficult to see how anybody could get over that. And I've heard people try to do it, and I just think they're pretty unconvincing.
I fully agree. In the church where I preach, I'm the preacher, but the church where I preach has never hired a woman to be the preacher of the church there. That is a very important authoritative in terms of its authority in that ministry in particular. It's an authoritative role. Now, we have women who do teach classes, but they teach classes to other women who teach classes to children. We have ladies' days. We have days where only the women in the church come together and they have someone preach a sermon, they sing, they do it, and it's all led by women. The authority structure with men and women is such that men have the authority over women. 1 Corinthians chapter 11. Man is the head of woman, the head of Christ is man, and the head of Christ is God. There's that whole entire structure as well. So this stuff is ordered in creation. It's all throughout the scripture. It's very clear, and if you have an argument against it, please, I want to know. Again, people often say, number one argument that I've heard is, well, women are just so talented. Why do you want to quash their talent, quash their ability? You don't have to. If you're a woman who has a great teaching ability, there's a million ways you can use that without usurping authority over a man. And doing that in a mixed assembly that God doesn't want you to do it. There's a million ways you can do that. And then there are people who act like there's no way to know what this verse means. And there's some other branches where they just say it's cultural and they can't prove that, or they say that they don't really care even. I've heard that as well. What's the most convincing argument you have for having women pastors, for example, given the qualities in 1 Timothy chapter 3, Titus chapter 1, husband of one wife? It's a man that is being spoken about in those contexts as well. But even a preacher, I'm not a pastor, I'm not an elder, I'm not a bishop, just as a preacher, in an authoritative role. Again, there is authority in the preaching of sermons, Titus chapter 2, verses 11 through 14, especially verse number 14. There's authority there's leadership there in that teaching ministry, the preaching ministry. And so how do you make the argument for that? I really want to know what you have to say. I'd love to have a discussion on this, maybe do another video on this in the future. Let me know what you think. I love you. God bless you. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, consider supporting on Patreon. The link is in the description below. I'll talk to you soon. Goodbye.